is Raf Regalado. Oh, okay. So how do you?
Deep learning is this branch of machine learning loosely inspired by how the brain works. We have had experience building software for deep learning over the last few years.
Although it was initially a research project, we've since collaborated with about 50 different teams at Google and deployed these systems in real products across a really wide spectrum of areas. Today, it's used heavily in our speech recognition systems, in the new Google Photos product, Gmail, in search.
We've really taken all that experience and built that into TensorFlow. TensorFlow is this machine learning library that's used across Google for applying deep learning to a lot of different areas.
Doing both artificial intelligence research and deploying these production models. They're really powerful at doing various kinds of perceptual and language understanding tasks. These models are able to actually make it so computers can actually see.
I think this is actually another panel that I'm super excited about. Okay, so I would like to kick off this with maybe we'll do a round of intro with the speakers. So, your name, your company, what is exactly the real world application of AI that you are working on, and what is your biggest achievement with this project? Okay, all right, let's start with Tang first.
So I'm Thang Leung. I work at Google Brand. So in the past, I have built translation models that has been deployed to Google Translate. I think that is the thing that I'm most proud about. And we're currently working on question answering. This way, when you search Google, for example, you don't have to read through all of the documents, the search results. Hopefully in the future, that can save time.
Hello again, I'm Ken. As I mentioned several times in my presentation, one of the real-world applications that I deeply care about nowadays is sustainable food production in a controlled environment. Ultimately, I would like to have a robust, generalizable framework that can work across industries in agriculture, energy, and transportation. And I would happily retire once I can solve two problems.
My name is Wen, founder and CEO of Dressing Social. We solve only one problem, which pick a random person in the world. We should be able to answer, should a bank lend money to them, at what interest rate, with what expected credit loss, and by what amount. So we'd like to do that for at least 3 billion people in emerging market, and by that I also retire with Hua.
Hi, I'm Ralph Regalado from the Philippines. I work with Senti. So Senti, it's a localized NLP platform. We do analyze text in the Filipino language. We work well with corporate companies who would like to build their own custom NLP models. Right now, like we're working with insurance companies who would like to automate some of their claims processing. So one per client, like we help them reduce around 25% savings for their claims processing. And like we also work with airline companies, marketing and advertising agencies who would want to recognize and understand all of their text data.
Thanks, Ralph. My name is Phương Hoang. I'm from graphics minor and also from VDI. So we are focusing on utilizing simulation and AI for students from primary, secondary, and high school to learn to learn in interactive and intuitive way. So what I'm really proud of is until now there are many people still staying at the dream place to listen to us.
Right. So from your experience, right, what are like the most common pitfalls that any AI practitioners should be aware of, and how to avoid them? So maybe we can start from that your end. Pitfalls, common pitfalls that
The
people should
common-
watch out for.
Yeah, the common before like we think like AI or machine learning like black box, and we just study what many people they mention about the term. We don't understand exactly what is the math mechanism behind it. So if you understand math, you will fall in love with many other things, not about AI, not about ML or DL.
I think in our case, it's more of like acceptance of the technology itself, because people tend to, when they talk about AI, it would replace people on their jobs, right? So it's more like first, if relatively you're working with a company, you need to educate them as to what's the impact of it. I think to highlight what Ken mentioned, the economic value always plays a part, especially if you would want to work with corporate companies and would want to understand how AI would be beneficial for them. So very important thing is for you to talk to the right people, especially if you're working with corporate companies who would want to invest artificial intelligence. So talking to the right people, changing their mindset, and make them accept that AI is relatively something that they cannot, the AI would come regardless of they would accept it or not. So it's more of like changing their mindset.
For probably the biggest sin is brute force, because we deal with the data generated by human behavior, and the search domain is ridiculously large, and people don't act the same way that machine acts. They act strategically, and without understanding human at a intuition level, then we'll be solving wrong problem for a very long time.
So in my first tech talk here, I gave a talk about the 10 lessons in machine learning. So basically, I already described the 10 common pitfalls. But on top of my head right now, I would like to say that one common pitfall for AI practitioners is to approach their clients, to approach the end users and saying that we have AI. Instead, they should approach their customers, trying to understand what problems those businesses have, and then claim, hey, we can solve your problem, we can help you save 20% of your cost. And just FYI, our technology is called AI.
So for me, one of the most common pitfall of AI practitioner is you want to apply AI too early. So I think so for many problems, maybe just a simple solution might work. So you might want to think about simple solution first before thinking about AI problems. So you have to set up a baseline. What is the performance you can get without AI first, and then you start talking about AI. So I think I see that problem a lot. People, I want to use AI, let's do AI. But sometimes you do complicated solution and it doesn't work as well as a simple solution.
So this is very, very interesting. So you guys are talking about the gap of, what people expect AI to be able to do, and treat it kind of black box, and what actually, can be delivered to the consumer or, the customers. So what is the limit of AI, right? What are the kind of like, let's say, the type of signals or problems that you would like caution people here to say, look, you know, let's try to really understand the problem, or let's try to apply some other solution before you go into AI. Any insights from there?
So a real problem that we have is that when we train our model to predict credit risk in Indonesia, we have a beautiful model that basically or increase the risk decrease linearly. Beautiful model, similar to Vietnam. But when we go out and start matching people with the lenders according to that score, suddenly the curve look exponential, right? So what caused that? It's actually not included in the model because the model was trained from existing methods, whereas our product introduced a new kind of bias. So in lending and in human data in general, the strategic aspect of human cannot be modeled in advance just because you never have data. So, but at least knowing that, we can design different experiments so that we kind of don't get surprised, right?
Yeah, very interesting. Kind of know your limit before you actually attempt it, right? Yeah. Any other insights?
In our case, again, the concept of Occam's razor, right, comes into place that you need to start first with a very, very simple model because sometimes simple model is already enough to solve your solution. And you go there step by step. So once a simple model is not enough, then you can explore a new machine learning model. But it's very good also to recognize what is a standard, what's the baseline currently that's appropriate and available for you now. Because sometimes if you tend to be, sometimes you have clients that they need to have a quick prototype immediately with, they need to see automatically the value of it. So probably you would leverage first existing APIs, but if you would want that specific model to be improved, and then you move it to a much more complex algorithm. So you try to look into first what's available out there that you can easily like build and develop, then you progress and explore new algorithms or much more complex algorithms.
In the past, in the past, people we came up with a kind of hypothesis-driven approach. I mean, we have a kind of correlation between variables, and we have a kind of the way we can reason, we can predict. But right now with AI, it seems like we got a lot of data, and we put it in a system, and somehow it works. So, I mean, correlation doesn't mean causality. So, if AI system can show us the uncertainty, I mean, like Bayesian approach, it could be great for any reasoning process. Yeah.
Just to clarify, the question is, what is the limit of AI systems?
How do you envision the limits of AI system, or how do you identify the limits before you look into the problem and try to solve it, right? So any insights on setting, okay, so this is not a problem for AI, or this is the right problem for AI. So how can you tell between the two?
Yeah, so I think one advice I often give to people, AI practitioners, is first you have to look at the size of your data. If you only have 1,000 data points, you cannot use AI, or maybe you can still use AI, but I mean, like, there are different techniques. For example, if you talk about deep learning, you might need more data points.
Yes.
You need like 100,000 data points, or at least like 10,000 data points. So you need to know your data size. I think that's the important question.
Yeah, that's a great point. You want to add anything, Kenneth?
Yes, I think so. This doesn't apply to just AI. Before you use any tools, whether that tool is the right tool or not, you need to understand. So some education is required. Like it's unavoidable. And once you learn, you understand what it's capable of, what's the limit, then I think it wouldn't be natural that you understand whether you should apply it or not. And just to be clear, AI is a very broad term. So AI contains zillions of techniques. So when you set out to solve a problem, you need to be specific about the, your problem definition and the tools and the techniques that you already know about.
I just want to add one point. So when people look at problems, right, you should look at a big picture. I think we should look at, there's a supervised learning problems where you have a label, like whether this is a cat or whether this is a dog. So we know that supervised problems are quite, I wouldn't say easy, but we sort of have a success in solving those. So we need to understand that. We have techniques for the, and for problems where we have few data points, then there's a question whether you can transfer, you can do some transfer learning. Maybe you do some unsupervised learning on large amount of like text data, or you teach the machine to just look at image like randomly, like maybe just like any types of image, and then you transfer to certain domain. So I think these are the questions you might need to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up a really interesting point that, you know, data is king, right, in the AI or machine learning realm. And, you know, it really depends on how much data you have that will dictate kind of like the approach, the solutions. So in your experience, what are the creative ways that people have been using to squeeze more data out of a problem? You know, would love to hear your thoughts so that, you know, in Vietnam we've been saying like, oh yeah, we don't have data, but how do we generate more data in a very creative way? Any examples, any thoughts?
So standard in machine learning is the data augmentation approach. People always have the need to enrich their data. For example, for speech recognition, you have a data set, and then you start adding all kinds of noise from the kitchen, from the bar, or on the street. By adding all kinds of noise, you have more data. So that's for speech. And then for vision, then you rotate your image. You add background images. You know, you change the lighting, so you get more data.
Great.
Another more scalable way to get a large amount of data is to be able to learn from weak signals, from bandit feedback. So think about running a search engine or a recommender system. So Google users will not label this result is relevant or not. Like, nobody does that. But all Google or Amazon and other systems, what the signals that they get is whether some link or some products is clicked or not. So the click is a weak signal. So we should think about how we can design a system that can learn from large amounts of weak signals rather than only trying to learn from fully labeled examples.
Agree with Hoa that we come from the background that we have a lot of data, but each the signal have very low correlation. Understanding the interaction of these signals in a large quantity actually helps us a lot in building the world-class risk assessment models. One example is that, for example, in India we have a network of 850 million people with billions of connections. That's a lot of dimensions. Each of them is very weak. How do we synthesize those dimensions into smaller number of dimensions that meaningful for the Indian population is a challenging problem. Another issue with credit data is that it's very expensive to run experiments, because let's say we want 1 million loan to train the data, then we're going to spend a few $1 billion just to collect that data. And these data tend to be very biased to certain segments, certain products, certain underwriting policies. And the variation of this is mind-bogglingly big, right? So when we design the model, we have to incorporate the certain kind of data from certain kind of process for certain kind of banks for to create a representative sample of a country, right? So we don't need to go to every bank in the country, but if we can go to, let's say, a lender that cover the biggest spectrum of the country with least bias, then we start from there.
I think same thing that we don't really have an issue with data. This is very important because when you deal with businesses, they have a lot of data. So it's more of like understanding which in the business process produce the most data and try to leverage on that. So in our case, we don't have any experience yet that we have less data because most of the data are relatively stored in a huge database of these companies, and it's already labeled. By the way, they manually labeled it. They have their own effort of like categorizing data. It's a matter of like automating this to have a much more efficient process within the business. So our approach really is more on the other side. Like we tackle the business process first. Like, okay, what's your business process? What are the data around this business process? Is it something that you can apply artificial intelligence into it? How many times do you process this type of data? So if you have seen an opportunity that you can relatively leverage, or they have huge data, and it's relatively, a lot of people are investing a lot of effort in this, into categorizing data. So there's already like one key point, you can now have an economic impact, and you also have a leverage on the internal data itself. So try to look the problem into a different setup, like, because corporate companies have a lot of data. It's a matter of like investigating the business process within the corporate business itself.
Just squeezing data is like, it's very difficult. For my team, 1.5 years ago, we started with several guys, and we think about the way to apply AI for education, and no data. I mean, this is like, there are many data, but kind of messy one to learn to build up kind of virtual assistant. So we think in the way that we can construct a platform, an educational tool for teachers and students, and somehow they have the moment they love. They can create something. They can generate a lot of text as well as images for us. So all kinds of the educational data set gonna release to many developers around the world. Hopefully next year. I'm not sure, but hopefully, yeah. So from startup point of view, I mean, we try to do our best to serve our customer. But meanwhile, we try to collect the data to support them in a better service. And another way to think about the problem, I think maybe like this is kind of a bottom up, but we can think about a kind of top down approach. Even Brazil, Chile, and Kenya, and the US, they have their own open data, data initiatives. But what about in Vietnam? What about for Southeast Asian country? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? So I think I mentioned earlier that, that China made so much progress in machine learning recently because they have farms of people just labeling data, like a sweatshop, right, for data generation, which is, it's just mind-boggling.
I was about to add
Yeah,
that
so-
idea. So I agree. And it is a lucrative business in China. And someone here should try to set up a similar business here in Vietnam. Lower labor cost here in Vietnam, lots of demand, and someone doing it, I would be a happy investor.
Yeah.
So there's also one strategy that some of my Stanford friends had done is that you crowdsource data in a smart way. So you don't label for every example, you only for difficult example. Then you connect to maybe Amazon Mechanical Turk or maybe future, labeling farmhouse to label those difficult cases.
And I've seen actually some of the project on blockchain, they tokenize the data and incentivize user by reward them with tokens when they contribute data. And then of course they have like cross checks and all that stuff, which is a very, very interesting approach. But on the other flip side, right, when you have too much data of one type, it usually bring in bias or overfitting. So here's a funny story. It's funny in the sense that it hasn't happened yet. So there's a self-driving cars, right? There was some person on a wheelchair was crossing the crosswalk backward. And you could have guessed, right? Of course, the self-driving car algorithm would just run that person over. And so like the guy who doing the algorithm say, oh, wait, we just need more data, right? More, sample of this. And so they collect a lot of sample of people on the wheelchair crossing the road. And you guys guess what happened after they do the training? The algorithm would still run over the person, but even with greater confidence, right? Because there's no sample, there's no sample of that. And so how do you guys address this issue, for the overfitting, for the buyers? Any tips that you would give to the audience?
I think I can answer that question because, as I mentioned several times today, we in our group we study a lot about uncertainty modeling, right? So so nowadays all of our models are probabilistic. So for in-domain data, we can predict with high confidence. For out-of-domain data, our model should be able to predict with low confidence. One example that we have already deployed is CaptionBot. So before this, I used to work on image captioning, and we productized our image caption engine. And if you try CaptionBot.ai for image that are out of domain, the bot would say, "I'm not so confident." So when you have the confidence output, it helps the downstream planner to do to make a more informed decision and do the right thing. Yeah.
So in our domain, it's almost impossible to create context. For example, psychometric is quite interesting approach in evaluating creditors by asking people a bunch of questions. But if you do that with Mechanical Turks, and it's going to fail because people don't have the pressure that a borrower would face when they apply for a $2,000 loan for, let's say, to send their kids to school. So I don't have an answer for that. So the only way that we deal with that is actually to get more and more partnerships and get the data from the actual context, and with the hope that with enough banks participating in contributing the data, it's going to cancel out some part of the natural bias or intentional bias, but we actually don't have an answer for that.
In our case, it's more of like trying to set the ground rules also with the companies that we're working with, that we can try different types of varieties on how to evaluate the model. And I think as shared by Sir a while ago, it's more of like testing it out on the real data. Because when you work with companies, you try to like do it first on the corporate, on the research setting first. So you have a lot of variety on how you can like evaluate model, you can do your train test, validation split, and so on. But it's more of like after you do it, testing it out on the wild data is very, very also important. So it's more of like trying to also improve the model as you go on, depending on how the data, how the collection of data that you would be having.
I think I will add no more.
Yeah, I agree with Nguyen that I think it's a difficult problem. I think we don't have a way to reduce bias, but we can have a way to check for bias. So people start thinking about adversarial examples. Things like you start a fake, in America, self-driving car, we have a stop sign, right? So it stops. What if you draw the stop sign on the paper? We will also stop as well. So things like that. So I think adversarial is something that people try to work on. It's become a new area. And then I also want to touch a point that people talk about, like fairness, equal gender. Like when you translate, you don't want to over translate into like male gender for languages like French. So people do check for that. Yeah, I think we don't have a way to reduce the bias, but we can verify. We can try to understand our model a little bit more. People start talking about explainable AI. How do you pick inside your model to see what is actually working? Like by looking at, for example, when it's making decisions, what part of the image the model is paying attention to. So by doing that, we hopefully can address some issues.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating topic because, like we're building AI, supposed to be inclusive, right? Because, they're building for the world population. And in fact, there are a lot of, people with disability, older people and things like that. And it's just like baked in natural bias when you collect data, even with like, sampling, right? Once you sample, large enough, then, you still have that bias. So let me switch gear a little bit and ask you maybe like, more general question. So Elon Musk say that, we should be worried about AI, AI is gonna kill us all and, it's the end of the world. So what are your thoughts on this? Which camp are you on? And again, right, this question is gonna be inside this room, no one is gonna talk about this except live streaming on Facebook, of course, but
I think so. I mean, just kidding. Just kidding. I don't know how to say, but I mean, even in Viet AI, we try to nurture talents in AI so that many software engineers they can understand about AI, so they can have a better way to build up the next system in AI. So I strongly believe that Viet AI will not build any virtual assistant or a robot to kill us, to kill people.
Yeah, I think so. It's more of probably yes in the future. I don't know, but that's my thought. But it's more of like, how do you prevent that from happening, right? So it's as shared. It's more of like instilling the right understanding on how artificial intelligence are built, because sometimes people would just use black box model without them knowing how it is working. So a lot of APIs are out there, and when you ask them like, why does it work, they don't know it works. It just works, and that's it. So it's more like scary in the notion that someone would actually build something that didn't know how it works. It's kind of scary, right? So it's more of like instilling that specific principle that when you invest yourself, you need to like understand how it works. So it's more of like pushing towards education, helping developers understand deeper context and deeper like understanding on how these algorithms relatively works.
To me, the threat of general AI to human, it is not something that we focus every day on. Instead, we want to give $100, $200 to people who don't have that to buy a motorbike. Having said that, I believe that before we understand how the brain works, how knowledge and pre-populated model transfer from one generation to another generation through DNA and so on, until we understand how brains works and collectively how human brains work and passing through generations, the advancement in current AI is, I would say, baby step comparing to the threat that had been claimed.
I think that Elon Musk he probably was on marijuana.
On something, yeah.
So
He's just trying to sell cars. So.
So I have nothing to comment.
Yeah, so I'm on the positive camp. So I think we have a lot of positive hope about benefit that AI gonna bring to us. I think like you can think about, we can speed up drug discovery. Right now it takes like 10 or 20 years to build a new drug. With AI, we can, run experiment on the computer to know what kind of trial we can do, so that we can save time. And we might be able to cure cancer, or like longevity, live forever. I don't know, like cure aging. I think there are a lot of exciting opportunities. Self-driving cars that save lots of life. I think maybe in the next 5 years, people won't be allowed to drive in the highway. I think it's pretty soon. And the other thing that we need to be careful about is we need to be prepared for the changes. I think there will be lots of jobs that might disappear. I don't know, like even maybe in the future you can just like do coding by just speaking instead of typing. You know, it frees us from low-level jobs. You don't have to code the same algorithm again and again. You can just say, hey, let's write a code that sort this array for me, and it just write for you. So we will have a chance to do more high-level work. I think but we need to be prepared. We need to have the skill set to be ready for that new changes.
All right, well, great answer. I'm glad you guys are all positive, because otherwise I'll just split you guys up and then I'll be done, right? Have you guys debating against each other. So I think I'm on the same camp. There are 2 points I would like to bring up. So one is actually, you know, like, I think the objective function, right, the reward can be baked into the algorithm to make it become more altruistic, right? You know, of course, you know, if the only reward is you care about the payoff, how much the algorithm is making, then, you know, they will be, you know, the monopolists or like, you know, playing trick to the other guys. But if, you know, there's certain thing that you can bake into the reward function about, okay, you know, how about being nice to people and stuff, I think that's another thing that we can go. And then on the job points of view, I think, yes, a lot of jobs are going to be out of business, you know, unfortunately. But I think AI would create a lot more new jobs as well, right? If you think about the internet, if you think about the web, you know, 10, 20 years ago, people were afraid of, yes, you know, it's going to take away a lot of different jobs. But also, you know, who ever knew that web designer and web developers become such a lucrative career, right? You know, a lot of people are getting you know, a lot of money for this kind of job. So anyway, so I just want to end you know, our discussion on a positive note to open up questions to the audience. Anyone want to raise your hand, ask questions? Any new face? Okay, a lady first. One lady. Okay, no lady. Okay, how about on the other corner? Yes.
So when I saw Mr. Leung Văn Thang question, will you be the next like Google Brain? I just have a weird thing. I thought that like I will never be a Google Brain, but the fact that Google is currently my brain now. Yeah, when I encounter a problem, maybe the first thing I do is asking my mom, and the second thing is I searching on Google. And so I think that when I, you know, we have many like recommendation system now, like Spotify. If you want to listen to some music, just open the Spotify and will show you. And so I think like technology is subconsciously like control my mind. And my question is like, will we act the same in the future? Like,
yeah, this is a great question, right? And that's actually brought up another point of fake news. Fake news, you know, made the elections in the U.S. So, you know, again, right? So this bias of the technology, and you know, somehow we got really influenced by the technology, by the recommendation, kind of live in the bubble. So how do we counter that? Okay, maybe just one or two answer, and then we'll move ahead. Maybe Ned?
Yeah, I think the fake news is a good problem because it will create new jobs. So we have been talking about AI will eliminate jobs, but fake news will create new jobs for the fakers and also for the fake news fighters. And the fake news fighters need to be trained in AI and machine learning in order to find the fake news. It's similar to the security problem. There will always be hackers, and there will always be white hat security researchers. So that's a good problem.
So to answer your question, I would like to add another point that there are two things that you should consider, right? One is exploitation, and the other one is exploration, right? So once you explore enough the space, how much do you want to go? It's like going wide or going deep, right? And so you can always balance between the two. Let's say you've been going deep for a while, time to go explore more, right? And so those are the two variables you can use to kind of counterbalance each other. All right. Next question. Justin Social.
Test 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm Kat from Justin Social as one of the data scientists. I have two questions actually. One is about the open data collaboration. If you want to, you need to create incentive for people to contribute their intimate data into the, for example, medical data. You can do like Google DeepMind in the UK to collect an NHS record, but for me it's quite sensitive and illegal because without consent it could not be used. So how do we create that system based on blockchains or whatever technology to encourage that kind of sharing? Because it will become a very valuable and good data for mining to do whatever. The second thing is about the ethics of AI. So how far can we accept AI to manipulate our emotion? That is the question.
Great questions. Ethics also include, you know, let's say car running down the street, right? There's like an old lady and there's a bus of, you know, full of children. And, you know, you have to choose where to, you know, swerve and avoid. How do you choose? So any insights from our panel?
Yeah, I think you know that recently people start putting up like a partnership on AI where people start to discuss about AI safety, principle of AI for the future, so that we don't get like robot that's gonna destroy us. So we have some. I think people are start thinking about steps to address those.
I think the first question about the data ownership and data sharing is a very deep question. I spent a lot of time thinking about this as well, and I think the current state of data ownership is extremely unfair, and data should have been owned by people, not by corporations. But unfortunately, probably 99% of people data is actually owned by corporates, and hopefully the decentralized systems can help us in the future. I think this is a kind of a question for the next decade. So we're gonna have to wait a little bit before the world come out with a much fairer way of owning and sharing data. On the second question about AI manipulating our emotions, I think it's actually resonate with the previous question. And also, it's actually not just emotion, but understanding, right? So if we live in this bubble of Google for the liberals or Google for the conservative, eventually we're gonna live in a very different bubbles. And what is the reality? Actually, this is a very deep question. So 15 years ago, when I talked to the first Catholic that I really talked, you know, as a friend, and he said, I asked him like, why did he believe that Jesus actually exists? And his answer was that because people after him keep telling the story. So I laughed and said, but there's no document, it's just story. And he said, but World War II only exists in stories. It is in books, in photos, but it's still stories. And now we are in a world that anyone can create a story or reality which look beautiful, and probably some in the next few decades can communicate directly with our senses. Then what is the future of human? That's actually a very deep question that I don't know an answer, but would like to throw it out there if any one of you have an answer.
Yeah, very deep question. I think like the first one, can we act in the same way, and emotion? So I have some of my friends, they are Christian. I'm a Buddhist, and some of my friends, they have no religion. So maybe in the next few years, some of us, we accept AI with emotion, but some of us, we don't accept it. I'm not sure, but I mean, human perception is something it's very complicated to model. I'm not sure the day, but neuroscience could be the next topic for many researchers around the world.
So one thing I do know that people have been trying to making social robots, robots with emotion, and they resoundingly failed. A lot of money went into that, and it just couldn't deliver. Jibo is one big example. So I think it's still the frontier of technology, right? Anyway, next question.
All right. Quick comment on the topic of data efficient learning. So we have like engineer methods, which works really well, right? With data, data efficient methods. And then on the other hand, we have deep learning methods, which we use like bit-fed model, simple models, and then we feed a lot of data. And then in the middle, we have like of the spectrum, we have methods like combining both of the worlds. So, for example, we have deep symbolic systems or neurologic learning, combining logic layer and then neural network layers. So I think those are the areas that we need to pursue more to achieve more data efficient methods. Now I have a question for Thang. Even though you try to avoid talking about dialogue generation systems, but I want to hear more about the work at the Google brand, especially those related to the thought vectors and the consciousness prior, something related to those. I mean like those with kind of high level priors or constraints that deviate a lot from the maximum likelihood modeling.
Yeah, I guess I can't comment on internal work right now, but I think we do have an interest in dialogue and chatbot. It's a difficult problem, I would say. I think one of the key problems is how do you measure progress? I think that is the question, not only for researchers, but also for the AI practitioners. Even when you build companies, you need to define a clear metric to know the progress of your companies and the progress of your research. So we have a great success with machine translation because we can measure it. People call it blue score. But blue score just fail for dialogue because there's just many ways of replying to the same context. Whereas for translation, even though there could be slightly different ways, but they all have the same meaning. So which is why we sort of almost we have a great success for machine translation, but dialogue is still challenging. I think if we can solve the metric problems, we would make a good progress on dialogue and chatbots.
Thanks, but my question is more about representation issue, like how any research focus on representing thoughts, to generate conversations.
So just a big vector, a large vectors, yeah, just a bigger models, deep models, so everything.
Still grounded in data?
Pardon me?
Still grounded in data, or any way we can kind of encode our prior knowledge?
Yeah, I think this is a good question, but we don't have a good way right now. I mean, of course, you can always crowd into you can connect your dialogue to knowledge graph, for example. People already extract facts like Barack Obama is a husband of Michelle Obama, but they're actually a different debate. We debate a lot at Google as well. Do you really need knowledge graph, or you can just learn everything from the text? Because knowledge graph is built from text, right? So can you just go ahead and just learn from text? So I think there's a different angle of looking at the problems. Maybe just a big model, huge computation, lots of TPU. You can just learn everything from text.
Thank you. A lot of I have a wild guess that Google brand is working on the Thought Tensor. Thought Tensor, right? They released TensorFlow, but do you see any tensor in it? Probably not. So so Thought Tensor would be cool.
Let's work on that.
Wait, so actually, you know, that remind me, Microsoft, I think, is having a better Chinese machine translation than Google. And why is that? Any comments on this?
So there's a news article that Microsoft reached parity for translating between English and Chinese. But there's a few questions about the test set. It's like, I think like it's, yeah. And then the kind of the human translation that they compare to is not very high quality. So that's one thing. And I would say like in the academia, the best model right now is based on transformer architecture. That was from Google.
I do not disagree, but I just want to add another perspective. Microsoft research has been around in China for a long time. We have great researchers in China. Google, on the other hand, really ignore China. So you don't, there's no Google researcher in China. So I think that's the unfair advantage of Microsoft there.
MSI.
Yeah. So I actually, to clarify a little bit, I think Microsoft did have a very good system for English and Chinese. The question of human barrier is still in discussions. But I think in the past, Microsoft researcher also managed to make a few like milestone. For example, like they reach close human performance speech recognition. Or recently, they have like reached human performance for question answering. But these are still relative. For example, for question answering, they reach human performance. But these, again, you know, human performance are quite relatively depending on how you collect your data set, right? If you collect rating from only 3 normal human, it's a different story. But if you collect from 3 high educated people who can answer the question very well, and that's a different story. And then even after those claims, people can still make further progress. So I mean, the bus system that I mentioned is the one that, you know, I think right now stay at the top, also from Google.
Okay, so just one point. So the authors of the Birch paper, most of them actually came from MSR. So they just stole people from us. And they have better compute infrastructure, which I admit. Yeah. Yeah.
More questions, Paul?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the, I think it's truly world-class discussions over here. And while debating between Google and Microsoft, but I want to say something that probably most of you here don't have, but Tuk actually has it. So it's about the interaction between machine and human. So AI, it seems like the brain, and where's the body, right? How's system going to interact with human in the future? You know, we have the smartphone right now, but we envision a future where robot is actually working together with human. So it seems like people and lots of companies are investing a lot in the brain, but without investing enough for the body. Mechanical design and engineering has been a bit lagging behind, I guess. And even Japan, where I'm from right now, still also investing a lot in robotics. So what do you see, what you guys from US and some of you from Vietnam, and so what do you see that gap between robot and AI, the body and the brain?
I promise I didn't plan this question. It's all his question, okay, for you guys. So the gap between AI and robotics, right? So AI is all in the cloud, you know, on your smartphone. It's a virtual world, and you know, robotics actually, giving it the body. to the AI, if you will, is a soul. And then so, the gap is still there. So how do you see this gap is being, closed up, or, what do you think about this gap?
I can add some. Yeah. I think in robotics it's very huge topic. Even in my lab at Posttech, my professor he spent around 20 years in haptics. Haptics is the stand of touch technology, and with the robot is over there, you can touch the virtual objects. But actually, the question is like, if the robot can grasp the object like the same way we hold the bottle, it's very difficult because the force sensors normally kind of in the way we feel the force, and the robotic arms can destroy the bottom easily. So there are many diverse research topic in robotics and AI, and we need something like Cambria to support researcher in both fields. So I think now I give it to Thực Vũ. You can add something.
Well, so I think I'm on the same camp with you. We firmly believe that the hardware would enable the software to go into places, right? So that's why we've been focusing on robotics. But robotics is hard. Hardware is hard, and robotics even harder. If I have to restart it again, I wouldn't do robotics in consumer, to be honest with you. Which is why we're trying to build an open platform with the incentive, with the collaboration to really make it happen. Because otherwise, we won't have anytime soon consumer robot. Of course, industrial robots, with manufacturing, people can charge a lot of money for the robots, so that's pretty obvious, right? But for consumer robots, you need the low cost, and then you need the robots to behave well with human, right? So that's like a cobot, right? And you need the and you need to encounter for a really unstructured environment. So a lot of things can go wrong. And so how do you deal with all of that? It's a really big problem. So which is why I think we haven't seen too much success so far. But self-driving car is a robot, right? So I think that's the one area that I've seen the most advancement. Okay, one more question, one last one. Any lady? Any lady? Okay, no. All right, there we go. All right, one round of applause. Please introduce your name. Which area are you working in?
Hello everyone, my name is Kui. I'm working in Germany in an influencer DB marketing company in the field of data science. So right now I'm also working in NLP and computer vision. So I have one question for Mr. Thang Lung related to NLP, especially translation, because right now I'm working on the data set related to hashtag. And as you know, human always have a creative in the way they create new language, new vocabularies, especially with hashtag. They can change all the time the combination between word and word, and how the Google's translation deal with that problem.
Chắc là bó tay thôi. Yeah, so it's a challenging problem. Even things like slangs or idioms, Google still have problems translating those. So the only way that Google can do is if there's more data of that type, if people can contribute translation of those, or there's a website somehow that where you can figure out the parallel data to train your translation model. But just to one remarkable point about the technology nowadays, doesn't matter which language pair you're working on, as long as you have enough data, you can make a very good translation system.
Okay, so one last round of, sorry, you have something
okay.
there? Yeah.
Just to add on that, so we tackle a lot slangs, we tackle about like hashtags. We do a lot encounter those data, especially in the Philippines. Like we generate a lot of social media data. So like we try to build our own word embeddings trying to recognize all of those. What's unique also in the Philippines is the context switch, like you have Filipino, then mash it up with English in one sentence, which makes it the analysis of the language relatively hard. So it's more of like we're trying to play around with word embeddings, but still needs to have to point out the necessary needs to have a lot of more data for it to try to be useful. We try to look into several slangs so far, but still like need to have much more data, collect more data for us to be for that word embedding to be much more useful.
Yes, I totally agree with you related to word embedding, and the potential of hashtags is related to train, because they create new hashtag mean new train in the word. And I think that if we can have the problem, the solution for that problem, it will be great for Vietnam.
Just add one quick point is that nowadays people operate at the sub-word level. So because if you work at the word level, then they just a growing number of words, new words just coming out. So a new strategy is to split a word into sub-word, a smaller unit. So that is like what most of the new NLP model have been trained on. So when you split into subwords, I think that also solves the hashtags, because when you split into subword, then only the hash at the beginning is different, and the other word could be like quite similar. So that could help solve part of the problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add a follow-up point. I think Thanh mentioned a great technique, and it just happens that has been around for a few years. So there was prior work on letter triagram, and also character level CNN and letter triagrams. So there was a paper back in 2013 from MSR about using letter triagrams to do sentence level embedding.
Thank you very much.
All right, I think time's up. So one last round of quick answer. Okay. So what is your favorite AI company that is not your own, and why? So I'll quickly go through this. And of course, you know, what is your favorite AI company that is not your own company you're working on right now, and why? We start from
Google.
And why?
It's more of like trying to.
Are you working at Google?
No, I'm not.
Were you working with the Google developer?
Google developer.
Okay, that's
group.
cheating. No, you can't do that. Next one.
Let me think first.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to brainstorm.
Come on, guys. Let's make this fun. Company. Yes, company. The AI company that is not your own. And why? Tang is trying to stall in too. We can, okay, maybe Nguyen can start.
For me, it's the DeepMind because they are audacious.
Yes, great. Kenneth?
I think one company that I like now is a startup called Prowler in the UK. So if you search for Prowler, you probably, so there's an article say that it's the next DeepMind and so on. I don't think that they have any real world applications yet, but I just like the way that they do research based on, they work on principles AI. Yeah.
I think it's probably a good time to thank for our sponsor. So I would say Elsa Speak is the company that I quite love, because it starts out very small. You just want to help people speak English well with good accent. But it turns out to be later on transformed into a speech company, speech technology companies. And now I think, I'm not sure if people know, when you search for how to, like when you use Elsa, right? I'm marketing for Elsa at the moment. So when you type some sentences and then learn how to speak a certain phrase, or you speak yourself and get the corrections, you're actually contributing the data to Elsa. So Elsa have lots of data about how foreign speakers speak phrases, sentences, and they can also direct you to speak certain sentences as well. So I think this is a very smart way. It's such simple. Just a goal of teaching people to speak good English. And now they have the team that deal with speech, and then they have lots of data.
Great. How about the other end? 2 more.
Yeah, so there's a company in the Philippines called Capital, which is focused on agriculture. So they relatively like help finance farmers. So it really they use artificial intelligence to like measure the yield itself and then the number of what type of amount of loans you can actually give to this specific type of farmer.
In my experience, I admire in Inrix company. They provide kind of you know, the app for many vehicles around the world. Basically, in automotive market, we thought that maybe Ford, maybe GM, maybe Toyota, they can, you know, manage the GPS data from cars. But in Inrix, they created a very innovative way. They provide a better, you know, service for many car drivers around the world. Yeah.
All right, great. So that's it, guys. So please join me in giving the panel a round of applause. Thank you, guys. Great talk. All right, I think that's it, right? That's it for our summit. Thank you so much for being here and being the fantastic days. Let's mingle around. I think we still have the venue for a while. So, let's mingle and chat, and hopefully a lot more collaboration will come out of this, all right? All right, see you guys next year. Bye.